Welcome to Scary True Stories. What I'm about to share with you is not fiction, but the terrifying memories of real people who truly lived through them. Don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, and leave a comment telling me where you're listening from. Now, let's begin. That night, rain poured over Saigon, as if the sky itself was emptying. The clock on my dashboard read close to midnight. It had been raining since the afternoon, but as the night dragged on, the downpour grew heavier, pounding the streets like thousands of drumsticks striking at once. I steered cautiously through each bend, tires slicing the floodwater, sending sprays shooting up to the windows. Some stretches of road were so submerged, the water reached the rims of my wheels. The usually chaotic city was stripped bare, leaving behind a silence so unsettling it pressed against my chest. Every so often, a lone motorbike would dart past, kicking up a white spray before vanishing into the curtain of rain. Inside the cabin, the wipers scraped across the windshield in their steady rhythm. Thunk, 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 blending with the relentless hammering of the rain. The air was damp, sticky, yet chilling, wrapping around me with the weight of something invisible. Even then, a flicker of unease had already lodged itself in my chest, as if this night wouldn't just be another rainy shift. When my phone chimed with a new ride request, I froze. The pickup point, an old bus stop right next to Bin Hung Hoa Cemetery. The name itself echoed in my head like a cold whisper. That cemetery sprawled endlessly across the city's edge, gloomy in the daylight, let alone under a midnight storm. A shiver rippled down my spine. For a split second, I thought about closing the app, turning the car around, and calling it a night. But then I looked at the screen again. The fare was unusually high. Heavy rain, few cars on the road, the surge price explained it. I drew a deep breath, telling myself, I'm just a driver. I haven't done anything wrong. What's there to fear? So I shifted gears, pressed the gas, and headed toward the old bus stop beside the cemetery. But deep down, I knew. It felt less like a job notification and more like a warning I had chosen to ignore. When I finally pulled up, the sight before me made me grip the steering wheel tighter. The street lamp beside the stop flickered erratically, casting a sickly yellow glow over the rusting shelter. Rain slashed through the gaps, spraying against the cracked concrete floor. And beneath that fragile roof stood a figure, a girl. She stood utterly still, as if she had been waiting there all along. I rolled down my window, forcing a polite smile. Hey, are you the one headed to District 8? The girl gave the slightest nod. No words. Her long, drenched hair hung forward, plastered against her face, hiding most of it. What I could see was skin so pale it almost glowed under the flickering light, so bloodless it felt less alive than it should. The rear door opened, and she slipped inside without a sound. The instant she did, a rush of cold air swept through the cabin. Not the cool relief of rain-soaked air, but a chill that prickled across my skin, raising goosebumps, even though the city outside was still heavy with muggy heat. And with that cold came something else, a stench of damp rot, sharp and sour, like clothes left soaking in stagnant water for far too long. I swallowed hard and flicked my eyes to the rearview mirror. She sat perfectly straight, head slightly bowed, gaze fixed out into the sheets of rain, silent, motionless, as if her presence was less of a passenger and more of a shadow. From the moment that door closed behind her, I felt it. The cabin had changed. It wasn't just a car anymore, it was a cold chamber, a sealed vault of damp air pressing against my lungs, and I couldn't shake the sense that I wasn't driving alone anymore. Then came the smell, a sharp, clammy stench, thick and sour, like clothes left soaking for days in the rain, so pungent that a single breath felt heavy in my chest. It seeped into every seam of the seats, clung to the roof, and stuck stubbornly to each breath I drew. I quickly lowered the front window a crack, hoping the gusts of storm air would sweep some of it away. But no, the smell didn't come from outside. It was seeping out from the passenger who had just taken the back seat. I flicked my eyes to the rearview mirror. The same still figure, long dripping hair covering her face, shoulders darkened with wet patches. No movement, no reaction. Yet somehow, it felt like the entire car was being overtaken by her cold presence. And in that moment, the question surfaced, chilling and absurd, but impossible to shake. Was this really just another ride? I turned slightly, holding out my phone to confirm the destination. She gave only the faintest nod, so subtle I almost missed it, then turned back toward the window, her face hidden, watching the sheets of rain that swallowed the street. I cleared my throat, trying to break the silence. "Would you like some music? Or should I adjust the air conditioning?" No answer. The car rolled on, gliding through flooded streets that shimmered under weak pools of yellow streetlight. Inside, the silence pressed harder, so dense I could hear every squeak of the wipers dragging across the windshield. Scree, 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 layered over the pounding rain above, like relentless knuckles rapping on the roof. Every few minutes, my eyes betrayed me, darting to the rearview mirror. And each time, the same sight. She sat rigid, spine perfectly straight, head slightly bowed. Her soaked hair veiled her face so completely I couldn't make out even a glimmer of her eyes. This wasn't ordinary silence. It was a suffocating veil, a shroud that smothered the cabin, making even my breathing feel strained, unnatural. I forced myself to believe she was simply tired, or maybe just not the type who liked small talk. But deep inside, a slow, gnawing unease crept in, whispering that whatever I was carrying in that back seat wasn't entirely from the world I knew. Following the map's directions, I turned into a narrow alley. Instantly, the glow of the street behind vanished, swallowed whole. Ahead stretched nothing but a corridor of darkness. On either side rose damp, crumbling walls mottled with moss, slick with years of rain. From their cracks, rivulets of water dripped steadily, plink, plink, merging with the flood beneath my wheels. Each splash echoed upward, sharp and hollow, a rhythm that gnawed at my nerves as I drove deeper into the alley. The deeper I drove, the narrower the alley became until my side mirrors were barely a hand's width from scraping the damp walls. The car felt like it was being forced through a long, suffocating tube. Pressing forward was nerve-wracking, turning back was impossible. I stole a glance at the map on my phone. It was the correct route, but looking at the walls around me, a cold sweat spread across my back. No lights, no houses, just endless slabs of gray brick and heavy branches overhead, their leaves hanging low, swallowing what little light trickled down. The feeling hit me hard. This wasn't a residential street. This was a passage leading somewhere darker, somewhere that didn't feel like it belonged to the city outside. My heart started to race, and for the first time that night, regret stabbed through me. Regret for ever accepting this ride. The car crawled forward, tires sloshing through standing water, each bellowing splash echoing under the chassis like something being dragged across a lake. The alley grew thicker with shadows until finally, the wheels stopped. The road was gone. Ahead stood nothing but a dead end, a crumbling brick wall mottled with black moss. Beside it, a massive ancient tree loomed, its dense canopy blotting out the last fragments of light. Rain dripped steadily from its branches, pattering against the roof of my car in a slow, hollow rhythm. I clenched the steering wheel, jaw tight. "That's it. The end," I muttered under my breath, and quickly turned to ask the girl in the back if there had been a mistake. But the back seat was empty. No door click, no footsteps, nothing. Just a few stray drops of rain soaking into the upholstery, leaving behind a faint, spreading stain. My throat locked tight. In the cramped cabin, the musty odor suddenly thickened, like someone was still sitting there, still present, only I couldn't see her anymore. I swallowed hard, trembling hand lifting toward the rearview mirror. What it reflected back was nothing but a hollow stretch of black leather, slick with water, glistening faintly in the dim light like the trace of someone who had simply dissolved into the air. I sat frozen, both hands locked on the wheel, pulse hammering so hard I could feel it against my ribs. On the seat where the woman in white had just been, a shallow puddle of rainwater remained, spreading slowly across the fabric. Drops slid down into the seam of the cushion, drip, drip, each sound unnervingly clear inside the suffocating silence of the cabin. The stench of mildew clung heavy, refusing to fade. It lingered in every breath I took, as though her rain-soaked clothes were still there with me. And the harder I tried not to breathe it in, the tighter my chest seemed to close. I tried to take a deep breath, but the more I inhaled, the heavier that damp, sour stench became. The small cabin now felt less like a car and more like a sealed box, one I was trapped inside, with something unseen sharing the space. A shiver crawled across my spine. My shirt clung cold against my back, as if the leather seat itself was sweating moisture, seeping sticky and clammy into my skin. In that moment, I knew with certainty. The girl hadn't simply left the car. She was still here somewhere in the thick darkness, leaving behind traces like a warning that I had just carried something that did not belong to this world. My hands shook as I pulled out my phone to check the app. On the screen, it was clear. Trip completed. Paid in cash. I frowned. Cash? She hadn't handed me a single bill. My eyes darted toward the glove box where I usually kept spare change. And in that instant, every drop of blood in me seemed to freeze. Not the familiar polymer bills. Sitting neatly inside were 3 pieces of Joss paper spirit money, soaked through, edges crumpled, clumped together, dripping onto the thin plastic lining. My mouth fell open, my body locked stiff. Outside, the rain kept hammering down in torrents, but inside the car the only sounds were the frantic thud of my heart and the slow drip, drip, drip from those paper notes. I reached out, hesitant, and brushed them with trembling fingers. They were icy to the touch, soft and soggy, half disintegrated like pulp. A pungent odor wafted up burnt paper ash, mingled with the same mildewed stench lingering from the back seat. And right then, the truth hit me. That ride had never been just another trip. The payment I'd been given didn't come from the world of the living. A few days later, once I'd steadied myself enough, I shared the story with some of the other drivers. At first, they just laughed awkwardly, saying I must have imagined things in the storm. But one of them, Than, an older driver with a weathered face and hollow eyes, grew unusually quiet. After a long pause, he lowered his voice and fixed his gaze on me. That place. This wasn't the first time. A year ago, on a night just like that, heavy rain, strong winds, there was a young woman walking home down that alley. They said she was wearing a white dye. Right as she passed the old tree, it snapped, came crashing down on her, killed instantly. His words drained the warmth from me. Every detail I had lived through, the smell of damp rot, the white dress, the dead-end alley. The 3 soaked spirit notes clicked together like the pieces of a nightmare puzzle. And in that moment, I realized what I'd carried that night was never meant to reach a destination. Than went on to say that ever since that death, more than a few drivers had picked up passengers headed toward that same alley on stormy nights, and many of them came back shaken, terrified, just like me. When he finished, he let out a long sigh, his eyes drifting somewhere far away. "You're lucky," he murmured, "because some never came back the same after meeting her." I sat there in silence, numb. The story might have ended in words, but deep down, I knew one truth with absolute clarity. That ride had never truly ended. I still remember that night vividly. I was a college student renting a small room in Thuduk, right in the middle of finals season, the kind of time when your brain is constantly spinning with textbooks and pressure. Outside, it rained as if the entire sky had tipped over and poured straight down onto the earth. Sheets of water slammed against the old tin roof, drumming relentlessly, echoing off the narrow walls of the boarding house. Within an hour, the courtyard below had turned into a dark flood, the water creeping almost up to my knees. Through the small window slit, I could see the murky current swirling, sweeping away trash, plastic bottles, and dead leaves. The power had gone out early. The whole row of rooms was silent, drowned in darkness like a buried cellar. The only light I had was a small candle on my desk. Its weak yellow flame flickered and trembled every time a draft slipped through the cracks in the door. Each flicker stretched my shadow across the wall, twisting and warping it into the shape of some strange figure silently watching me. In that cramped room, the damp stench of waterlogged plaster mixed with the sharp smoke of candle wax until the air itself felt suffocating. I pulled the blanket up around my shoulders, trying to force myself to finish a few more pages of notes. But the pounding rain outside and the suffocating dark made every line of text shiver and blur. That was when the feeling crept in, an odd, chilling sensation that tonight, in the middle of this historic storm, something wasn't right. The rain outside was so violent, it swallowed every other sound. No motorcycles, no voices, nothing but the heavy, hammering blows of water striking the tin roof, reverberating like I was trapped inside a giant drum. In the middle of the city, usually alive and buzzing, I suddenly felt cut off from the world. Every breath I took sounded too loud, mixing with the roar of the storm, reminding me of just how isolated I was. I glanced out into the corridor. The entire row of rooms was drowned in pitch-black shadows, so thick it felt like you could reach out and touch them. Only here and there, faint glimmers of other candles flickered in a few rooms down the hall, tiny, dying embers threatening to go out at any moment. Instead of comfort, those faint lights only carved out warped, shifting silhouettes along the corridor walls, shapes that looked disturbingly like figures lurking at the far end of the hall. A draft slipped in through the back door, carrying a long, thin whistle of wind that sounded eerily like a sigh, low, drawn out, and mournful. I clutched the blanket tighter around myself, my chest heavy, an unshakable dread seeping into my skin. For the first time that night, I had the sickening thought that maybe my room wasn't safe anymore. Then, through the relentless roar of the rain, another sound slipped in. At first, I thought it was just the storm twisting through the warped roof beams. But the longer I listened, the clearer it became. It sounded like crying, a thin, trembling sob, weak, distant, like it was echoing from the bottom of a dry well. A fragile, stifled sound, quivering with gasps, like a child abandoned in the night. My chest tightened. I shot upright, every muscle in my body rigid. The crying, faint and blurred at first, was now growing clearer, as if someone was slowly moving closer. I turned my head toward the wall on the right side of my room, and froze. The sound was coming from the room next door. I was sure of it. But what made my blood run cold was the fact that the room had been empty for days. The last tenant had just moved out, and I remembered clearly the door was still padlocked from the outside. So then, where was that crying coming from? I pressed my ear against the thin plaster wall, straining to listen. The sobbing didn't fade. If anything, it grew heavier, more urgent, each muffled whimper crawling closer, like some small, fragile thing was sitting right on the other side of that flimsy partition, weeping quietly in the storm. Cold sweat trickled down my spine, and the hair on the back of my neck stood up like needles. Before I could steady my breath, another sound slipped through the sobs. Knock, knock, knock. 3 gentle taps, deliberate and evenly spaced, struck the wall directly beside where I sat. The sound wasn't loud, but in the silence of that drowned boarding house, it cut through with terrifying clarity, like each knock was aimed straight into my chest. I froze, my ears strained so hard it hurt, trying to pinpoint the source. Then it came again, slow, careful, each knock threaded between the gasping cries. Knock, followed by a faint, stifled sob. Knock, a pause, then another long, trembling whimper. Knock, the sound. It was unmistakable. It was the sound of a small hand. Light, weak, but persistent, like a child tapping the wall with its tiny fist, waiting for someone to answer. My chest tightened even more. For a split second, the thought flared in my mind. If it really is a child, maybe it's calling for help. But just as quickly, a wave of icy dread swept through me. Because I knew the truth. I knew too well. That room was empty. Completely empty. No child could be in there. I swallowed hard, my throat dry as sandpaper, gripping the corner of my blanket so tightly my fingertips turned white. The crying seeped on through the rain, and those knocks kept coming, steady and patient, as if waiting for me to respond. I curled up on my bed, wrapping the blanket tight around me like a flimsy cocoon that could somehow shield me from whatever was lurking out there. I kept whispering to myself, "You're just hearing things. It's just the rain pounding on the tin roof, or maybe water dripping through the rotten walls." I repeated it over and over like a mantra, begging the paranoia to fade. But the crying, it didn't stop. Instead, it grew heavier, more relentless, each sob digging deeper into my skull. Every whimper didn't sound like it came from a throat at all, but as if it were bubbling up through water, thick, choked, like some small, drowning thing thrashing at the bottom of a river, its desperate cries bursting through the surface, slicing through the dark, straight into my ears. I squeezed my eyes shut, clamped my palms over both ears, but inside my head, the crying echoed, still circling, bouncing, clear as day against the roar of the storm. I shook uncontrollably. For a moment, I felt like I was being pulled down with that invisible child, sinking into black water, choking on the sobs rising all around me. I tried to endure it, but my body betrayed me. The urgent pressure in my bladder struck hard, twisting my stomach, making it impossible to stay hidden under the blanket until morning. I knew I had to go outside, even though every part of me wanted nothing more than to stay locked in my room until daylight. With trembling hands, I reached for the latch. The dry click, as it unlocked, made my heart skip a beat. I pushed the door open just a crack, and immediately, a gust of damp, icy air slapped me in the face, carrying with it the sour stench of stagnant floodwater. The hallway was pitch black, so dark that the single candle in my room cast only a thin, uneven strip of light before being swallowed whole by the curtain of rain beyond. Water rose nearly to my knees. I stepped down cautiously, the icy cold shooting straight up my spine. Each step sent out a loud splash, splash, echoing in the hollow silence. But what made my skin crawl wasn't just my own footsteps. Every so often, the water rippled outward in small concentric waves, spreading as though someone else had just stepped through right in front of me. I froze, held my breath, scanning the corridor. No one. Nothing but shadows, water on all sides, and the relentless storm battering the roof above. But I knew something was moving out there with me in that flooded hallway. I trudged forward, each step heavier than the last, forcing my breathing to slow so I could listen. And then, a bolt of lightning split the sky. The flash lit up the end of the row of rooms for the briefest instant, and I froze solid, right beside the old skylight. Well, the one crudely sealed over with cracked cement stood a shadow, small, frail, barely up to my waist. Its back faced me, unmoving. Long, soaked hair hung down in heavy strands, plastered against narrow shoulders. Its thin frame tilted slightly, as if listening to the rain. I froze, my legs stiff in the icy floodwater. A shiver cut straight through my spine as the realization sank in. That figure was too small to be an adult, yet far too still to be a normal child. And then, the crying, the sobs that had haunted me all night, stopped. Just like that. Gone. Not a single whimper remained. Only the thunder crashing overhead, hammering the world into silence. The quiet that followed pressed down on me, thick and suffocating. The small figure remained where it was, its back turned, motionless in the rain, like it knew I was staring at it, like it was waiting for me to come closer. I stood rooted in place, my feet glued to the murky water. That small, fragile shadow began to move. It turned, slowly, not the way a person normally turns, but heavy, deliberate, like it was submerged in unseen water. In my mind, I could hear each joint grinding, each shift of bone creaking, as my heart pounded so hard I thought it would burst. And then I saw its face, only for an instant in the darkness, but it was enough to freeze every nerve in my body. A pale, distorted face, with two gaping eye sockets, black and bottomless, like holes cut into infinity. No pupils, no glint of life, just empty void staring directly into me. The next flash of lightning ripped across the sky, flooding the hallway in a violent white light. In that instant, the figure was gone. All that remained was the curtain of rain, the drowned corridor, and the cold, forgotten well. No trace of what I had just seen. But I knew. I swear I knew. It had been there, and it had looked at me. I barely slept, if at all, until the sky finally began to lighten. Only when the rain eased did I dare to crack open my door. What I saw made my heart seize in my chest. Right there, pressed deep into the wet cement floor, were tiny footprints, so small they could only belong to a toddler, maybe 3 or 4 years old. And yet, each one was indented unnaturally deep, carved into the soft mud, as if whatever left them was far heavier than its fragile size should allow. I crouched down, my hand trembling as I brushed lightly over the indentations. They were cold, damp, solid, so real I could still smell the raw, earthy scent of fresh mud rising up. What made my breath catch was the direction they led. Not scattered, not random. They were clustered right at my door, and then stretched in a perfect line toward the empty room next door. I slammed my door shut, cold sweat breaking out across my neck. It was undeniable now what I had heard, what I had seen the night before, wasn't just a hallucination in the storm. A few days later, when I finally worked up the courage, I quietly asked some longtime residents who lived around the boarding house. At first, they just chuckled, telling me not to let my imagination get the better of me. But the moment I specifically mentioned the old skylight well at the end of the row, one of them fell silent. After a long pause, Their voice dropped to a whisper. They said that many years ago, right at that well, a child had fallen in and drowned during a heavy storm. And ever since, on nights when the rain came hard, people in the neighborhood would sometimes hear crying, faint, distant, echoing as if it were rising up from under the water. My spine turned to ice. Everything I had experienced suddenly aligned with that story, forming a horrifying picture too clear to ignore. I didn't stay another day. I packed up my belongings, returned the keys, and left that place behind. And yet, even after moving far away, the haunting has never left me. Every time the rain pours down at night, I still hear it, the faint knocking, the muffled sobs playing in my memory as vividly as if it were happening all over again. And I know now, there are encounters in this life where just once is enough to follow you forever. That night, the rain came down as if the sky itself had been torn open. Gusts of wind howled through the old glass windows, making the hospital building tremble with each blast. I had been assigned to work the night shift alone at the morgue, a small, decaying wing tucked far behind the main hospital. The moment I stepped inside, the air felt different, colder, thicker, heavy, like it clung to my skin and refused to let go. Inside the refrigerated chamber, 3 bodies lay in silence. One, an elderly man who had passed from old age. Another, a middle-aged man lost in a traffic accident. And finally, a young woman, brought in after ending her own life. 3 stainless steel drawers, cold, unforgiving, each one holding a story cut short, a life that would never be continued. I sat in the tiny guard room, listening to the rain hammering against the tin roof. The sound was relentless, filling every corner, making me feel like I was the only living soul awake in a place overflowing with death. Outside, the storm raged on, rain pounding, wind shrieking through the cracks in the old doors. I tried to focus on the crumpled newspaper in my hands, forcing my mind anywhere but here. But then, through the chaos, another sound slipped in. At first, I thought I imagined it, faint, fragile, so soft it almost disappeared under the storm. But as I listened harder, my chest tightened. It was crying, a weak, trembling sob, drawn out, broken into small gasps. It sounded like a young woman's voice, splintered, stifled, as if trying desperately not to be heard. It wasn't loud, it wasn't clear, but it came from the back room, from the cold chamber itself, and pierced straight through the storm into my ears. My entire body froze. In that instant, a chill like ice ran down my spine, because I knew, deep down, that something was wrong in the place where there should have only been silence. I held my breath, straining to listen. The crying didn't fade away. Instead, it began to merge with another sound. Clink, clink, clink. A steady, hollow rhythm, like metal being tapped from the inside. I shot to my feet, heart pounding in my chest like it wanted to burst through my ribs. My footsteps echoed across the cold cement floor, each one ringing out louder than the last, until it felt like the building itself was listening. The hallway was pitch black, the beam of my flashlight trembling as I swept it across stained, watermarked walls. The sound led me deeper, closer, until I found myself standing in front of the steel drawers lined neatly along the wall, and the tapping, sharp, deliberate, was louder than ever. It was coming from drawer number 3. My throat locked up. My stomach twisted, because I knew exactly who was inside that drawer. The young woman, the one who had been brought in just the night before. Another clink rattled through the silence, then another, like fingernails dragging, scratching, pleading against the cold steel. And in that moment, one thought cut into me so violently I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. What if she hadn't really died? I froze in front of freezer drawer number 3. Then suddenly clink, clink, clink. The sound came faster, sharper, echoing through the cold room. It wasn't random anymore. Too steady, too deliberate. Exactly like fingernails tapping against thick steel from the inside. Cold sweat beaded across my forehead, running down my spine even though the room was already freezing. My eyes locked on the polished steel door. Every strike reverberated straight into my chest like a hammer blow. And then, it came. A cry. At first faint, fragile, like it barely slipped through some invisible crack. But then it grew clearer, broken, trembling, sobbing, the unmistakable sound of a young woman weeping. It seeped through the metal barrier, crawling directly into my ears, tearing across every nerve in my body. My whole body locked up, because in that moment, I couldn't hear the storm outside anymore. The rain, the wind, it all vanished. There was only that cry, clear, raw, as if she was standing just inches behind this steel door, begging for someone to let her out. My legs refused to move. It was like something had nailed me to the cement floor. My breath came in short bursts, chest heaving as though a slab of stone had been set on top of me. Shaking, I pressed my ear against the cold steel of drawer number 3. The freezing metal shot straight through my skin, chilling me to the bone. And then I heard everything. Clink, clink, clink. Fingernails dragging, scratching against steel, just a few inches from my face. Then came the sobbing again. Harsh, desperate, broken into gasps, as though some soul inside was pounding on that door, begging, pleading for release. My hands clenched so hard my knuckles turned white, but they wouldn't stop trembling. The chill along my spine rose like static, every hair standing upright. My brain screamed, "This is impossible. A body can't..." But my ears wouldn't let go. The sounds pressed in, undeniable, forcing me to believe the unthinkable. In that instant, I realized I was caught between the thin edge of reason and something far more primal, pure, bone-deep terror. I stumbled backward, slamming against the wall behind me. My mind was blank, my limbs weak. A silent scream roared inside my head. "Run!" And instinct won. I spun on my heels and bolted out of the freezing chamber. My footsteps pounded down the dark hallway, echoing against the wet cement, merging with the storm outside, like 1,000 war drums chasing me into the night. My foot caught on the slick edge of the floor, and I went crashing down. My back and arms slammed hard against the freezing cement, but I didn't dare look behind me. I shoved myself up with trembling hands, stumbled forward, then broke into another frantic sprint, my breath tearing out of me like my lungs were about to burst. Each gust of wind howled through the cracks in the corridor, wrapping around me as if trying to drag me back. All I could hear was the pounding of my heart, hammering so violently it drowned out even the roar of the rain. At last, the door to the main guard station came into view. I threw myself inside and slammed it shut, pressing my back hard against the door as though to keep something from following me in. My entire body shook uncontrollably, my face drained of every drop of color. My hands were clenched so tightly they'd gone stiff, but in my mind only one thought echoed. If I had hesitated even a second longer, I might never have made it out of there. I all but collapsed into the guard station, slamming the door behind me. A few of the other men on duty lifted their heads. Their eyes froze when they saw me shaking, pale, my breath ragged and broken. There's something in drawer number 3, I stammered, my throat dry as sand. The room fell silent. I told them everything, the metallic tapping from inside, the muffled sobbing, as though someone was trapped in there. As I spoke, my voice trembled, my fingers unconsciously clawing at the desk just to keep steady. No one laughed. No one brushed it off. Instead, a few nodded slowly, their eyes dark and heavy. One of them let out a quiet sigh. "Sounds like you just came face to face with a spirit that hasn't found peace yet." The words struck me like a weight to the chest. They didn't ease my fear. Instead, they made it sink deeper, rooting inside me. Then, the oldest guard, his weathered face marked by countless night shifts, placed a hand on my shoulder. His voice was slow, gravelly. "Tomorrow, for your own peace of mind, you should bring some fruit, some incense. Say a prayer for her. When someone lingers like that, it's because they haven't let go. Helping them rest is the only way you'll find rest yourself." This is not sane. I sat there in silence, my skin slick with cold sweat, my vision blurring. In my head, the metallic knocks and that broken sobbing still echoed clear, relentless. And the only thought that remained was this. I had just come face to face with something that didn't belong to the world of the living. By the time the pale light of dawn seeped through, I was still slumped in the guard room, dazed from the endless night. Outside, the storm had faded, but the damp chill of the earth still hung heavy across the hospital grounds. Around 8 a.m., the young woman's family arrived to complete the paperwork to claim her body. Reluctantly, I had to follow the morgue staff back into that cold chamber. Crossing the threshold, my knees nearly buckled the memory of the knocking, and the crying from the night before came flooding back, heavy as stone pressing down on my chest. The door to freezer drawer number 3 creaked open. Inside, the body was still there. Everything looked normal. No signs of struggle. No trace of the horrifying sounds I had heard. She lay there quietly, her face unsettlingly serene, like someone who had simply drifted into an endless sleep. Her skin was pale, her hair fanned across the pillow. But when the white sheet was pulled back, my chest tightened until I could barely breathe. At the corners of her eyes, 2 clear droplets still clung, sparkling, translucent like tears that had fallen not long ago. Under the cold fluorescent lights, they shimmered, undeniable proof that last night she had really cried. I stumbled back, my chest locked tight, unable to look any longer. Others might dismiss it as condensation, or as nothing more than moisture in the room. But I knew. I swear I knew. Those were her last tears, left behind for a world that had abandoned her. After that morning, I understood one thing with absolute certainty. I no longer had the strength to return to that freezing chamber. The metallic tapping, the muffled sobs in the storm, they had carved themselves into my memory, etched there forever. By the following week, I filed a request to be transferred to another part of the hospital. I gave plenty of excuses, but those who knew me understood I had reached my breaking point, and from my own mouth, I swore I would never again take a night shift in the morgue. Sometimes, when I look back, I still ask myself whether I truly heard it, truly saw it, or if my exhausted mind spun it out of the storm. But every time the skies open up and the rain pounds down, the answer comes unbidden, because the moment I hear raindrops hammering the roof, my spine chills as if that sobbing is slipping back into my ears, clear, fragile, heartbreaking, exactly as it was that night. Years have passed since that storm, yet the memory has never left me. It clings like a shadow, seeping into restless sleep, lurking in moments when I thought I'd forgotten. All it takes is the sound of rain, each drop drumming hard against the tin roof, and it all comes rushing back. I hear the faint metallic tapping, like fingernails against cold steel. And then, through the storm, the sobbing returns soft, broken, but so haunting, it raises goosebumps across my skin. Others might shrug it off as just one strange experience on the job, a fleeting encounter to be forgotten. But to me, it's more than a memory. That rainy night left a permanent scar, a mark that will never fade. And I know, for the rest of my life, I will never forget that cry. I have to confess something. For many years, no one has ever believed my story. Every time I tried to tell it, people either laughed or looked at me with pity, like I was making up some twisted dream. But I know exactly what I saw, because it carved itself into my mind so deeply that it can never be erased. At that time, I was 12 years old enough to tell the difference between dream and reality, old enough to know the line between childish imagination and something standing right in front of me, and I saw everything. Today, all I want is for someone to listen. Don't rush to think I'm crazy. Don't dismiss this as just a scary story. I don't want pity. What I want is a pair of ears patient enough to take in the whole truth, the truth I witnessed with my very own eyes. Since I was a kid, I always loved the rain. The sound of it tapping on a tin roof, sliding down a car window, or drumming across the old wooden porch at my Uncle Mike's house always felt like a lullaby. It made me feel safe, calm, like the whole world outside could pause for a moment, just so I could drift off to sleep. But after that night when I was 12, everything changed. The rain was no longer gentle music. It became a signal, a warning. Every time the sky began to pour heavy drops, my heart would race, and my palms would turn cold and damp, as if the storm outside was seeping straight into my skin. To other people, rain is just weather. To me, it's forever bound to memories I can't escape. Every drop that falls drags me back to the sound of goats screaming, to the last look on Uncle Mike's face, and to the massive shadow that turned that stormy night into the nightmare of my life. Rain once, the thing that put me to sleep, became the key that unlocked the door to my deepest fear, a memory I can never shut away. I was born into a family where strength seemed to run in the blood. Some were hunters, others were lumberjacks, and some wore the badge of a police officer. Everyone was tough, solid, built to withstand the storms of East Texas. Among them, one man stood out to me most. My Uncle Mike, my father's younger brother. He was so tall and broad that even the strongest men in town had to tilt their heads up when they talked to him. His body was powerful from years of swinging an axe and splitting wood. His hands were full of scars marks from hundreds of battles against the rough pine forests. Yet when he placed that massive hand on my shoulder, all I felt was warmth and gentleness. He once built me a wooden desk with his own hands, the surface carved with stars. Every time I sat at it, I remembered those nights when he and I lay out in the yard, staring up at the Texas sky. That desk is still in my house even now, but whenever I touch it, my chest tightens. We bonded with each other in a natural way. Maybe it was because he never had children. After his wife passed away, he never remarried. I became the closest person to him, almost like the son he never had. And I believe it was that closeness that turned that night into a wound in my memory that has never healed. Uncle Mike's farm sat about 8 miles of dirt road from my house. Not far, but for a 12-year-old kid, that distance felt like crossing into another world. Every time my dad's truck stopped in front of the weather-worn wooden gate, I felt like I was stepping into a realm that belonged only to my uncle. Life in that farm was always buzzing. More than 20 chickens clucked and scattered across the yard, mixed with a few stray ducks that had long gotten used to living among them, as if they were part of the flock. In another corner was the goat pen, about 20 of them loud, stubborn, and endlessly restless. Uncle Mike cared for the goats so much that he built them their own wooden playground planks, stacked into steps, little ramps, and climbing frames. He told me it was so they would get used to climbing, keeping their hooves strong for the muddy days of heavy rain. Watching them hop up, slide down, and butt each other endlessly, I thought it looked like their own amusement park. I loved that place more than anywhere else. I could stand for hours tossing handfuls of hay to the goats, then stretch out on my back in the yard to watch the stars. On windy Texas nights, it was always the same. My uncle, me, and Blue the old, loyal dog, sitting together on the porch, gazing at the wide, open sky. Those constellations above us used to mean joy to me. They used to be the brightest memories I carried. Because it was so familiar, so safe, I never imagined that one day this very place would become the memory that makes me shiver every time I recall it. Blue, my uncle's old dog. I never knew exactly how old he was, but with his slow gait, his graying patchy coat, and his tired eyes, I often joked silently that maybe he had lived 100 years. Still, Blue was not fragile. On the contrary, he had a strange endurance, as if he had seen every storm come and go, and yet remained there, quietly watching life pass by. Blue never strayed more than a few steps away from Uncle Mike. Whether my uncle was hauling wood from the forest, checking on the chicken coop, or just sipping coffee on the porch, Blue was always there, following close behind like a shadow. I once heard adults say that some dogs become so bonded with their owners that they can even sense their moods. I believe Blue was one of them. To me, Blue wasn't just a dog. He was the witness to my childhood, a companion in all those nights under the stars with my uncle. I still remember wrapping my arms around his neck, burying my face in his thick fur, which always carried a faint smell of smoke from the wood stove mixed with dried grass. I used to think that if anything could make me believe in absolute loyalty, it was Blue. But it was also Blue who, on that fateful night, made me understand something else. Sometimes loyalty isn't just love, it's instinct. The kind of instinct that led him to follow Uncle Mike into the storm, into the darkness, and vanish, along with the terrifying memories that I've never been able to escape. That day started like any other. My dad drove me in his silver pickup down the bumpy dirt road that led to Uncle Mike's familiar farm. I was as excited as always, already picturing the goats ramming each other on the wooden play structure, and Blue shuffling his old legs to greet me with those kind, tired eyes. When the truck stopped at the gate, my dad gave me a few quick reminders before turning the wheel to head back home. I waved goodbye, then trotted toward the front porch. But the moment I reached it, I froze. The wooden door was locked. A chill ran down my spine. Uncle Mike's door had never been locked before. I could always walk in whenever I wanted, even in the middle of the night. But now, the iron-cold doorknob stayed still in my hand, as if it were some kind of warning. I hadn't even called out yet when the sound came. A heavy crash from the back of the property, where the small red shed stood apart from the yard. It rang out like metal being struck hard, followed by the dull, weighty thud of something slamming into the ground. The sound was so sharp, so hollow, so overwhelming, that the entire farm seemed to fall silent. I stood paralyzed, eyes locked on the red shed in the distance. Its old wooden planks, paint peeling and weathered, suddenly looked menacing, as if they were hiding something unspeakable. And in that moment, I knew this day would never be like any other. I was still staring at the locked door when Uncle Mike appeared from the backyard, but this time, he didn't look like the cheerful, gentle man I knew. His face was rigid, jaw clenched, eyes burning with a fierce intensity, not the calm eyes of every day, but the eyes of a hunter zeroing in on prey. He strode quickly toward me, his soaked boots thudding hard against the porch. His scarred, heavy hand came down firmly on my shoulder. I felt its weight pressing into me, part restraint, part warning. His voice was low and gravelly, whispered close to my ear, nothing like the warm tone I was used to. "You shouldn't be here right now." I shivered. I didn't understand what was happening, but when I followed the direction of his arm, my chest tightened. The wooden wall of the red shed in the distance was streaked with dark crimson, mixing with the rain pouring down. It ran in long rivulets, clinging to the old planks. In that instant, I knew something terrible had happened inside that shed. And for the first time, Uncle Mike's eyes were no longer a safe haven for me. They were the eyes of a man about to confront something far beyond imagination. Only minutes after his hand pressed down on my shoulder, the sky split open. Rain poured down, not as gentle drops, but as sheets of water crashing onto the tin roof and splattering across the soaked ground. In a matter of moments, the whole farm was swallowed in a curtain of rain so thick it felt like we'd been cut off from the rest of the world. I stood pressed against the kitchen doorway, straining to see outside, but the downpour had erased everything. The rows of chicken coops, the goats' play structure, all of it disappeared behind a curtain of white water. In front of me, there was only the soaked wooden porch and a few dark tree trunks etched against the leaden sky. The rain hammered down in a furious, chaotic rhythm, like 1,000 hands pounding the roof at once. In the middle of that chaos, I caught the sound of familiar footsteps slapping against the floor. Blue came running, his thick coat drenched, water dripping in steady streams onto the boards. He trembled, his head slightly lowered, his breath ragged and uneven. I bent down, my hand brushing against his cold, wet fur. Blue lifted his clouded eyes, dulled with age, and yet in them I saw something that sent a chill racing up my spine. Fear. The same fear I had just glimpsed in Uncle Mike's eyes. That old dog, so loyal, so constant, like my uncle's very shadow, had never once shaken like this. And when I realized that even Blue was terrified of whatever was hiding inside the rain, my heartbeat went wild in a way I had never felt before. Through the roar of the storm that felt like it might rip the roof apart, I heard Uncle Mike's voice echo from the other room. The click-clack of the rotary dial on the old landline, followed by the ringing tone vibrating faintly through the thin wall. "Hello. Listen. Get him out of here now. Tell him to turn around as fast as possible and call the police. Right now." His voice was sharp, urgent, almost a shout. I had never heard him sound so tense. I froze in the kitchen, my hand gripping the doorframe, heart pounding against my ribs. My eyes stayed locked on the storm outside, but my ears strained for every word spilling out of his ragged breath. I caught the frantic tap of a pencil scribbling against the phone table, the groaning creak of the wooden floorboards as he paced back and forth. And then, suddenly, click. The line went dead. No more voice, no static, nothing. Only the relentless pounding of the rain against the glass. That moment, silence crashed over me, heavy and suffocating. I realized we had been cut off completely from the outside world. My dad was already miles away. My mom had only heard half a sentence. The police hadn't even started toward us. It was just me, Uncle Mike, and Blue, standing in the middle of a storm that was swallowing the entire farm. And in that suffocating quiet, I knew something terrible was coming. Amid the pounding rain that sounded like war drums, another noise ripped through the air, the shrill, panicked cries of the goats. The sound was frantic, scattered, nothing like their usual bleating when they fought over food. Each cry sounded strangled, then snuffed out into the white curtain of rain. I lunged toward the kitchen window, squinting hard through the downpour. And then thud, something hit the wooden porch with a heavy smack right in front of me. I stumbled back, my heart slamming up into my throat. On the stained porch lay a severed goat's leg, twisted and grotesque. Dark red streaks spread out, splattering across the wet wood. Sheets of rain slanted in, washing the blood into long, thinning streams, until all that was left was the pale image of flesh, stranded and out of place against the porch. My whole body went rigid. I pressed my face to the glass, forcing my eyes to search farther into the storm. Out in the hazy yard, where the dark trees stood like crooked pillars, I spotted something that didn't belong. A tall, unmoving shadow. It never moved. Yet somehow, I knew with absolute certainty that it was watching. The awareness was so sharp, I felt my skin prickle, like 1,000 invisible needles pressing into the back of my neck. I couldn't make out eyes, couldn't even distinguish a face, but its presence was undeniable, close, and locked straight on me. In that moment, I understood. This rain wasn't only carrying the storm, it carried something else, something that didn't belong to the ordinary world. Before I could tear myself away from the window, Uncle Mike came back, the familiar rifle gripped tight in his hands. The polished wooden stock, worn smooth from years of use, looked like an extension of his massive arm. At his belt, he hooked his heavy axe, its darkened blade catching the weak yellow glow from the kitchen light. He locked his gaze on me, his voice rough and gravelly, more resolute than I'd ever heard it. "Stay inside. Your dad will be here any moment." It wasn't the voice of the cheerful uncle who once sat for hours beneath the stars telling me stories. Standing before me now was something different. A soldier, with a stern face and eyes like cold steel. I opened my mouth to speak, but my throat was bone dry. No words came. I only managed a silent nod. Right then, Blue stepped forward. His thick coat was drenched, water dripping steadily onto the floorboards. He didn't whine, didn't hesitate. He simply stood beside my uncle, lifting his cloudy eyes upward in unwavering loyalty. Uncle Mike wore no raincoat, carried no shield. Just a rifle, an axe, and the old dog at his side. He pulled the door open and stepped straight into the torrent. A rush of cold air whipped into the kitchen, carrying the smell of wet earth, iron, and the faint smoke still clinging to his shirt. I stood frozen, watching the shapes of my uncle and Blue blur into the storm, my chest sinking with the heavy certainty that they were heading towards something I could never bring myself to follow. I pressed my face against the fogged glass, eyes straining until they ached. Through the thick curtain of rain, their figures grew fainter, and then vanished completely. All that remained was the glistening yard below, rain hammering against the earth like relentless war drums. And then I saw it. A massive shadow slowly emerged through the gray curtain of rain. At first, I thought it was just a tree bent by the wind, but when it stepped closer, every nerve in my body went taut. Its shape resembled a human, but taller than anyone I had ever seen. Its hunched back rose and fell with heavy, labored breaths. And then, from behind it, something unfurled 2 enormous black wings, soaked and weighted with rain, yet radiating a menace I can't put into words. I held my breath. In the split-second flash of distant lightning, I saw Uncle Mike standing in front of the shadow, rifle raised, axe ready in his hand. Blue snarled, his fur bristling as he lunged forward. I couldn't hear the crack of the gun or the swing of the axe. The storm had swallowed all sound. All I could make out through the glass were blurred images. My uncle struggling, those massive wings thrashing violently, the hulking body looming over everything. Then came the moment of horror. The thing stretched out its distorted arm and seized Uncle Mike as if he were nothing more than a doll. He thrashed, swinging the axe desperately, but in a single heartbeat, it wrenched him off the ground. I froze, my eyes burning. I saw my uncle, the strongest man I had ever known, lifted high, then swallowed by the dark sky above. No scream left my throat. I just stood there, paralyzed, my heart sinking into a bottomless pit, while the rain hammered down mercilessly, erasing every trace of what had just happened. No sooner had Uncle Mike vanished into the storm than my eyes caught movement elsewhere. I rubbed them, thinking the rain was playing tricks on me. But no, they were real. Around the porch, just at the edge of the kitchen's dim glow, more shadows emerged. They stood motionless, towering and twisted like broken trees. But I knew they weren't trees. There was something in the way they leaned, in the tilt of their heads, like they were focused entirely on me. A rush of cold swept down my spine, leaving me trembling. I couldn't bear to look any longer. My throat clenched, and my legs took over. I bolted down the hallway, heart pounding like a drum, my footsteps echoing across the wet wooden floor. I threw open the door to my uncle's room and nearly dove headfirst to the ground, scrambling under the bed. My breathing was wild, my hands shaking uncontrollably as I clutched my chest, trying to keep my heart from exploding. In the thick darkness beneath the bed, the sound of the rain pounding on the roof filled my ears. It was no longer the soothing rhythm I once loved. Now it was deafening, chaotic, like 100 war drums clashing out of sync. That sound, combined with the memory of those unmoving shadows outside, pressed into my skull until the fear grew so sharp I thought it would tear me apart. All I could do was lie there, holding my breath, praying those things wouldn't take another step toward the house. Then a siren. A sharp wail cut through the storm, echoing from the front gate of the farm. It pierced the rain like a single fragile ray of light in the middle of crushing darkness. My chest tightened, and for a moment, hope flickered. Someone was here. They would help us. They would save Uncle Mike. But in the same instant, I froze. Right outside the bedroom window, only a few feet away, a massive shadow loomed. It stood motionless in the downpour, its entire body soaked, water dripping from grotesque muscles. I looked straight at its face. It wasn't human. Bone-jutted, hollow eyes sunk deep, sharp cheekbones that warped its skull into something like a death mask. Its shoulders were impossibly broad, and from its back stretched long, unnatural arms, black as burned tar, each finger ending in claws that glistened under the flashes of lightning. Then it moved. 3 twisted skeletal fingers tapped against the glass. Thud, thud, thud. The sound was steady, deliberate, each knock like a hammer strike into my chest. I shook, unable to blink, like a trapped animal pinned by the gaze of its predator. And then, it raised its other hand. In its blood-soaked palm, clutched tight between those black claws, was the sight that shattered my world. Uncle Mike's head. My mouth fell open, but no air came. Then, from somewhere deep inside me, a scream tore loose. It ripped through the air, carried off by the rain and the sirens outside. It wasn't the cry of a child, it was the raw sound of primal terror, the kind that erupts when a human being stares into something they were never meant to comprehend. After that, everything went blank. My memory cuts off right there. When the police forced the door open, they found me curled into myself in a storm of panic. My body was shaking uncontrollably, my mouth still spilling meaningless screams, as if my mind had been shredded by what I had seen. They dragged me out of that house, but not Uncle Mike. His body was never recovered. Even stranger, every goat, chicken, duck, gone. Not a drop of blood, not a single feather left behind. The red shed in the back, the place where I first heard the noise, had its roof torn apart. The metal beams bent outward, as though something had burst from inside. But the police closed the case with a single explanation. A tornado. Just a violent storm. My family never held a funeral. Only a memorial. As if Uncle Mike had simply vanished. But inside me, that final image, those monstrous hands lifting his rain-soaked head, became a funeral that has never ended. I grew up with therapists, prescriptions for sedatives, and nightmares that never stopped. Every night it rained, I would jolt awake, lying there wide-eyed until morning, my palms slick with cold sweat. I knew it with certainty. Rain was no longer just rain. It had become a symbol, a reminder, a warning. And deep down, I believed that creature spared me on purpose. Not out of mercy, not because it overlooked me. It wanted to plant a wound in my mind that would never heal, to make me live an entire lifetime under the weight of the fear it had given me. Even now, as I write these words, I can still feel it, like a shadow watching, patient, waiting, as if it never left, as if it's still out there somewhere, waiting to finish what it started decades ago. Rain has always carried two faces. To many, it is purity washing away the dust, bringing life, humming a gentle lullaby across rooftops. But tonight, after walking through 4 true horror stories together, you and I both understand, rain can conceal something far darker. It blurs the boundary between what is real and what is waiting, hidden just beyond that curtain of falling water. Remember this: the people in tonight's 4 stories once thought rain was harmless. They believed they were only facing nature, only weathering a storm. But no, beneath that cold, wet veil, footsteps vanished. Shadows spread. Faces appeared in windows where no one lived. The downpour was never just water, it was a curtain. A perfect disguise for something that knows how to wait, how to endure, and how to emerge at the very moment you are weakest. I can still hear it now, the pounding of rain against glass, streaming into dark alleys, hammering on tin rooftops. The rhythm repeats like a heartbeat, like a knock on a door you'd rather keep shut. Listen long enough, and the raindrops begin to feel arranged, deliberate, a sequence, a code, maybe even a voice trying to speak. And sometimes I wonder, is rain truly random, or has it always been whispering something we just haven't yet understood? Imagine this. When the sky cracks open and the storm descends, your ears lose clarity. That is the moment when other things can move closer. They advance, slipping through the roar of water, hidden by its endless hiss. No one notices because the storm swallows every sound, and by the time you realize you are not alone, it's already too late. These 4 stories tonight are 4 reminders. Rain doesn't protect you. Rain isolates you. Rain drowns your screams. It erases the evidence. That is why it has always been the perfect ally for the things we fear most. No one sees what's crawling through the sheets of water until it's already here. Perhaps you yourself have felt it before walking alone down a darkened street, clothes drenched, heart pounding faster. The streetlights flickered, their glow distorted by the rain, stretching shapes until they looked unnatural. And then you froze, because for just a moment you swore you heard footsteps behind you. Of course you turned. But the storm blurred everything, and there was nothing there. Or at least, nothing your eyes were able to see. That chill, that prickling at the back of your neck. That's why we tell these stories. Not to frighten without reason, but to remind ourselves that the world is stranger and far more dangerous than we want to admit. Every raindrop is a curtain. Every shadow it casts could be hiding a pair of eyes. Tonight, you and I have passed through 4 fragments of truth, 4 stories that leave damp, lingering stains in the mind. And now, as this screen fades and the video draws to a close, ask yourself, the next time you hear rain tapping against your window, are you certain it's only the wind outside? Or is something else standing there, waiting? Thank you for staying with Untold 365 until the very end. If these stories made you shiver, give this video a like, hit subscribe, and leave the number 2 in the comments, so I'll know you want more true and terrifying stories. Because here, on Untold 365, every passing day is another fragment of darkness. And don't forget, the next storm may bring more than just water. It may carry the beginning of a brand new nightmare. Goodbye, and until we meet again in the next episode.